Good morning. It is Wednesday, the 14th of January. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your daily dose of European news and analysis live on Euronews. Coming up today, the US president has said Iran will, quote, pay a huge price. He's encouraging Iranians to topple the regime and take to the streets. In just days, thousands have been arrested. Some face execution and hundreds are reported dead. Meanwhile, the European Union is preparing further sanctions on Iran following this ongoing brutal crackdown, and EU officials have also summoned Iran's ambassador to Brussels. For more on this story, I'm joined here now in the studio by our EU news editor, Maria Tadeo. Good morning. Just fill us in. What is the latest?
Well, Maeve, the eyes of the world clearly are on Iran protests that have been going on for 2 weeks. And as you say, the fear now is that these protests are turning into a bloodshed. And to that extent, the president of the United States put out a message yesterday in which he said, help, it's on its way. Let me just read it for a second for you. This is President Trump. Patriots, keep on protesting. Take over your institutions. Save the names of the killers and the abusers. They will pay a big price. He also says he's cancelled any contact and meetings with Iranian officials until the senseless killings continue. And then he says, as I mentioned, help, it's on its way, make Iran great again. Now, Maeve, we should remind our viewers that the international community set a very clear red line, and that is the protest should not turn into a killing machine. The issue now, and of course it's very difficult to independently verify what's going on the streets of Iran because of the connectivity issues we've talked about when it comes to, well, the communications, the telephone lines and the internet. But the concern is that the protests may have now resulted in the killings of 500 was the initial number reported at the start of the week. That number could now go all the way to 2,500 people killed. And of course, there's very serious concerns that the regime could start now to execute people in public. Of course, that means that in a matter of days, a court, quote unquote, has now decided that they are responsible and guilty for presumably terrorism. But of course, that is something that is very hard to believe that you can get to that assumption in a matter of days. President Trump was asked, what does that help or help is on its way mean? And he said the following. Let's take a look.
You said to Iran this morning that help is on the way for protesters. What did you mean by that? What kind of help?
You're going to have to figure that one out. I'm sorry.
So many people have been killed in Iran.
Nobody's been able to give me an accurate number. I have heard numbers from everything's a lot. One is a lot. But I've heard numbers much lower and I've heard numbers much higher. We'll be knowing. We're probably going to find out over the next 24 hours. I think it's a lot. In your first, it's too many, whatever.
Well, President Trump saying it's already too many and we're going to figure out in 48 hours, presumably by the end of today, potentially. We should also note that the Trump administration has had contacts with the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, who is insisting the protests need to go on. And this is a time for the Iranian people to take over these institutions. It's a fluid situation, but of course serious at this stage, very serious.
Indeed, and the US seems to be taking a lead. What about the Europeans? What are they doing?
Well, to that extent, we know there's been a call for more sanctions. We also know that Iranian officials have been banned from entering the premises of the European Parliament, but there is a call for more action. And yesterday, to that extent, I spoke with the president of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. She's been very outspoken on this issue. Let's have a listen to that interview. President, thank you very much for joining us. You've had some very severe condemnation to the Iranian regime and words of support for the people of Iran. The difference is important. How concerned are you about the situation on the ground?
Well, ever since I became president of this parliament, I have made it my mission to make sure that we stand with fights for freedoms around the world. And this is why we are appalled by what's happening in Iran, and we could not stand idly by when we see that a regime is using violence, it's using repression, it's using regression and abuse in order to clamp down on what we believe to be fundamental freedoms. In fact, these are universal freedoms, and that is why we took the step to ban Iranian diplomats and staff representing the regime from entering these premises. This has broad political support inside this House because we stand for the very opposite of what the regime stands for.
And President, the international community set a very clear red line, and that is the protest should not turn into a bloodshed. Unfortunately, it seems that is the way it's going. What can the European Union do at this point?
Well, we've stood with the protesters ever since we've started to see people gather on the streets. We've also condemned the fact that communications have been blacked out. We've seen 4 whole days of blackouts. We're now starting to see a little bit more of messaging coming through. We welcome any attempt to help them technologically because we need to see what is happening. And as you said, these are not just protests that are being accepted and being respected. They are being clamped down upon. We've seen violence. We've seen assassinations. This is not something we will tolerate. And the Iranian community, the Iranian protesters, have asked us for solidarity, for help, for messages, but not only for us to go a step further, to increase sanctions, to put the IRGC on the list of terrorists.
They should be considered now as a terrorist organization.
In a position of the European Parliament for many years now, ever since we've seen those brave women on the streets of Iran calling out for their life and their liberty and their rights and their dignity. This is why we have said that this autocracy should no longer be in power. We are calling for the Iranians to be able to see how this regime could come to an end, and we fully support them in that. I think the European Union has a golden moment in order for it to show its firmness, its strength, and also its clarity. We support freedom. This is a fundamental pillar of everything we've built our union on.
So there's no need to wait for President Trump. The EU should go from now.
Our appeal is to go now. We think that 2026 should be the year when dictatorships are over. And this is a golden moment for the European Union, for Europe, for member states, governments to say this regime, as the German Chancellor said, is on its last legs. We fully agree with it and we should go further.
And that is my final question. Do you believe now this is 2026, this is the ending of this regime? It comes to an end in 2026?
If not now, when? The people of Iran are calling for this to happen. We believe in them. We believe in all their efforts in order to see that there is a change. There is a fall of the regime. How that happens, that's not for us to say. It's for the Iranian people to determine, but we support them.
Well, President, thank you very much for joining us on Euronews.
Thank you.
And that was, of course, Roberta Metsola, the President of the European Parliament there, speaking to our Maria Tadeo. But now moving on to another story keeping EU leaders up at night, and that is Greenland. The US Vice President J.D. Vance and other US officials are set to meet with Danish and Greenlandish counterparts in Washington later today. The talks come amid ongoing fears that President Donald Trump is insisting the US must acquire the territory. For more on this, we can actually cross over now to the NATO headquarters here in Brussels, where our correspondent Shona Murray is standing by for us. Good morning, Shona. Just tell us, what is the mood there among NATO officials?
Well, as you can imagine, Maeve, Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary-General, has refused to be drawn into the impact on this alliance if one NATO country, the United States, were to forcibly acquire the land, the territory of another NATO country, Denmark and Greenland. So it's a real concern here. And today here at NATO, there will be a meeting of the North Atlantic Council, which is NATO's principal decision-making body, where the issue will indeed loom large, if not formally on the table, given those important meetings in Washington, D.C. later this afternoon. But really, I've spoken to some sources who said that they are in despair of the situation and the impact this might have on the alliance. In fact, one told me that Putin himself in his wildest dreams couldn't imagine to impose this level of division and disjointedness within the NATO alliance. So we'll have to see if any decisions around NATO allies like Germany and the UK saying that they will improve security conditions within the High North and the Arctic region will assuage what Donald Trump says he wants to do in Greenland. Maeve?
And Shona, do NATO allies actually believe Trump is serious here and that a takeover of Greenland is imminent?
Well, they have to take him very, very seriously. We know that Donald Trump has been talking about this since his first administration back in 2017. He's talked about it for the past year. He's obviously emboldened by what he would see as very much a success in Venezuela. The Americans say it's important for their security, which is why NATO allies are trying to say to them, well, look, let's all work together to protect the High North and the Arctic region from the influence of China and Russia. Many don't see this as something that the Americans need to do alone. It should be done within the alliance. But what's interesting is what we saw yesterday is this sort of united front being put with the Greenlandish government, the Prime Minister there, Jens Frederik Nielsen, and the Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, where the Greenlanders are saying if there's a choice between America acquiring them forcibly or remaining within the EU and NATO, even though they do have a strong independence movement, they choose Europe.
One thing must be clear to everyone. Greenland doesn't want to be owned by the United States. Greenland doesn't want to be governed by the United States. Greenland doesn't want to be part of the United States. We choose Greenland as we know it now, and that's part of the community of the Kingdom of Denmark.
Kongeriget Danmark.
Jens Friedrich Nielsen there, and of course our Shona Murray reporting live from NATO. Thank you so much for that update, and for more on Greenland, do keep an eye on Euronews.com. But now, coming up, we'll be joined by Pascal Lamy, the former head of the World Trade Organization and a former EU Trade Commissioner, one of Europe's most influential voices on global trade and multilateralism. Today, he's still very active in public life as Vice President of the Paris Peace Forum, as well as Vice President of the Jacques Delors Friends of Europe Foundation. Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to have you with us here on Europe Today. First, the big news this week in Brussels. On Saturday, President von der Leyen will travel to Paraguay. She'll be signing the Mercosur EU trade deal. You seem to be the only Frenchman who supports it. Is it good for Europeans, do you think?
Yes, I definitely believe, and as you just said, I'm reasonably informed about trade issues.
Yes.
That this is a good deal, like all the bilateral trade agreements which the EU has signed, adopted for the last 10 or 15 years.
And it means multilateralism works again, doesn't it?
I can understand some worries on the green side because of deforestation in the Amazon. I can understand some worries on the farming side because there will be a bit more imports of beef or poultry. But I think so far, and notably in the French case, these worries have been totally overblown. And what I hope, what I know, and I was the first Mercosur negotiator.
Indeed, because it's been going on for decades. But let's move on.
25 years ago, what I know is that if I had on the table the deal of today, I would have signed this 25 years ago.
There you go.
What I believe and hope is that the debate, which is now going to the European Parliament, I mean, the Senate, the Council has already cleared it. It now has to go to the European Parliament.
Indeed, and the French want to block it there.
Tough.
But Pascal Lamy, let's move on, because of course many in the Parliament now want the EU-US trade deal to be frozen because of the tensions over Greenland. What is your view here?
My view here is that we have to swallow this pill, which is very sour. And the reason for that is that we need the US on board on Ukraine.
Was it foolish,
That's the real background. It's a trade-off. I do recognize that there is no guarantee from Trump that he will keep supporting Ukraine the way we do it against Russia.
So was it a mistake to sign up to this deal in July?
No, it was not a mistake because not doing it or counter-reacting, which was a possibility, would probably have antagonized this guy. And, you know, we know how transactional he is. He can wake up in the morning and say, if the Europeans start flying into my feathers, I'm going to leave Ukraine. So this is something which is very serious. And by the way, when you look at the numbers, we've lost a little bit of market share in the US, not much, because in reality, the impact of tariff is not what
so just
he
briefly,
trumpets.
Any advice on negotiating with the Americans, just briefly?
Depends very much on how dependent we are from their strategic orbit. Given that we have a war in Ukraine, that this is a European war, and that we need the US on board, we have to be careful. The reality is that we are way too dependent from the US strategy-wise. This is not new.
It's been there
for the next 7 years. We know that we have to become more autonomous. It will take time.
Thank you so much, Pascal Lamy. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks for being our guest, and thank you so much for watching. This brings this edition of Europe Today to an end, but we will, of course, be back tomorrow. See you then.